Astronauts reported fuel sport, T-minus 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Beyond the Launch, the podcast that explores what really happens after the deal is signed and the product goes live. Because real impact doesn't come from implementation alone. It comes from intentional, strategic customer success. Hosted by Ivan Whitaker, an experienced executive in sales, customer success, and implementations, including complex 911 and public safety implementations. This podcast goes beyond the launch to uncover what truly takes drive, adoption, measurable outcomes, and long-term success.
Welcome to Beyond the Launch from Utah Podcast Studios. Today's guest, Max Keenan, is the founder and CEO of Aurelion, a rapidly scaling AI company transforming how 911 call centers operate across the United States. Aurelion leverages advanced voice AI to handle non-emergency calls, freeing up emergency dispatchers to focus on life-critical situations and helping address one of the most urgent challenges in public safety. Under Max's leadership, Aurelion has developed its technology nationwide, now serving millions of Americans and automating a significant portion of non-emergency call volume, saving staffing hours each day and improving response effectiveness. Today, he brings a unique perspective on what it truly takes for technology vendors to move beyond implementation and become long-term partners in driving adoption, performance, and sustained success. Max, welcome to Beyond the Launch.
Thank you, Ivan. I appreciate you having me.
So, Max, you've had a unique journey in the private space to get to this point, from salon scheduling software to having a game-changing conversation that led to the development of Aurelion. Can you tell us about that journey?
Yeah, honestly, I never imagined I would really ever be working in public safety, let alone 911. I never really even thought about it, to be honest. I kind of honestly assumed officers answered the phone, to be honest. And we were actually automating calls for hair salons. And so if you were booking, a balayage plus blowout plus whatever you could possibly imagine over the phone, we were booking appointments and giving people quotes, all with the new voice AI. And this was like early 2023. And one of our first customers was a hair salon in a major city. And she had a school pickup line that was blocking her parking spots. And I was actually there on site. I actually worked for a few weeks as kind of her receptionist as I was learning about hair salons, because obviously I don't know much about hair salons. And soon I won't know anything about hair salons when this all falls out. And I was there on site, and she had a school pickup line that was blocking her parking spots. And so she called the non-emergency line at 3 p.m. on the first day of school in the middle of the summer, and nobody answered. And she waited probably 30 or 40 minutes, and she hung up and called 911. And she literally asked me, she was like, "Max, do you want to help me out?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am. What can I do?" And she said, "Well, can you make it so the police answer the effing phone?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, I'll think about it." And then I remember I was sleeping on the floor of a friend's apartment in the city. And I was staying up that night, looking into it. And the first thing I found was this 30% staffing shortage. The average PSAP, I think it was an MCP study, Mission Critical Partners. The average PSAP is 30% understaffed. And I was like, maybe she's on to something. And so I started, going and visiting 911 centers. Well, actually, maybe taking a half step back, I didn't really know 911 centers existed. So I did what any, naive person would have done. And I decided I was going to go to a police department. And I was too afraid to go to Seattle PD. And so I went to Shoreline Police Department, kind of a small suburb of Seattle. I walked in, I had my little notebook in my hand, and I was like, "Can I talk to the chief?" And the front desk clerk, she was very nice. And she said, "Yeah, I can see if the chief has some time for you. Is this for a school project or something?" And I was just demoralized. I all the wind taken out of my sails. But the chief was great. And she actually walked me through 911. Even though she didn't run her own center, she knew a lot about it. And it kind of set me up for reaching out to PSAPs and doing ride-alongs. And that was really the first entry point. And then I started doing ride-alongs. And I remember the first center I went to, large center. They were staffed for actually right around the size you guys are. They were staffed for 150 full-time people, and they had about 100. And I started talking to her about this, and she was like, I asked how many calls they took, and she said, "We take about 200,000 calls." And I was doing the math, and I was like, 100 people for 200,000 calls. That doesn't seem
Right.
that bad. And she's like, oh, honey, we take 1 million non-emergency calls. And that was just like, that was the eureka moment. That was mind blowing to me. I had no idea. I never would have imagined two things that were crazy. One, that the same people answered 911 calls as answered non-emergency calls. That it's, I say now, it's the greatest misallocation of labor imaginable. It's like you basically, you train your team as Navy SEALs and you use them as mall cops. That's really, really
Right.
what it feels like.
Yeah.
Um, and that's what kind of sparked us on this journey. And it's been like the most rewarding experience of my entire life. Our first agency went live in April of 2024. And now we have over 50 agencies. I think we serve 15 million people across the US, and we're taking hundreds of thousands of calls every month. We'll soon be 1 million of calls every month. And it's been really exciting and a lot of fun. It's a very long story of how I wound up here.
No, but it's a great story. And I could tell you, when you talk about the numbers in a non-emergency environment, when I was at Priority Dispatch and we were implementing protocols, I quickly learned that the protocols that I was implementing was just a small portion of the work, probably about 10% of the work. And there was just this entire landscape out there that I wasn't tapping into. So bravo for being able to tap into that environment. Excellent
It's
stuff.
pure luck in many ways. And I think like one of the things, and this is like part of why I think I fell in love with 911, was pretty much everyone who I reached out to, and I was just trying to learn about the industry, was so passionate about their work.
Yes.
Like, everyone cared so much about what they were doing, and they cared so much about like actually teaching me how everything worked as well. And that was an experience I'd never felt in my entire life. And it gave me a lot of energy, made me very excited about what you all were doing in any ways that I could help it.
Exactly. And so, Max, I'm very excited to get into kind of the core of the questions. But before we do that, I have a couple of icebreakers that I'd like to get into so the audience can know a little bit more about you. And so the first one is, what's something you believed early in your career that you've completely changed your mind about now?
Interesting. It's a good one. You're starting me off the hard icebreaker. Thought we were supposed to have softballs. No, I think like one of the things that I think I probably changed my mind very quickly on was, what's weird is like a founder of a company, you start hiring for roles that you've only done for like a very short period of time. And it's really easy when you're thinking about this role of like, I need somebody who's done X, Y, and Z for X years and Y years, and they're pedigreed through the books. And what I've kind of come to find is that there's actually like a few things that matter when bringing someone onto a team and thinking about a culture above everything else. And number one is like, do you care about what we were doing and why we were doing it? Number one thing, more than anything else. And then two, are you somebody that's going to take responsibility for the things that you're doing? Are you going to, the way we frame it internally, are you going to own the outcome? And it actually turns out that like, if you really care about what you're doing and you're willing to own the outcome, like nothing else actually matters really. Like people will learn everything else. And that was something that like took me a little while to learn how important those two characteristics were above everything else.
So if we ask the people who know you the best, what's one trait they say defines how you show up, whether in business or personal life?
I thought they're going to get easier. So when we were interviewing our second employee, his name's Alex Hacker. He's with us today. He kind of runs our implementation team. We were on a walk and I'd been just pestering him with questions. And I know you've never been interviewed by me, but I really like getting deep on specific things.
Yes.
And he asked me, he was like, and he asked a good question, which was like, why are you going to be able to do this? Like, why are you the person to be able to kind of bring this into a reality? And basically, he ended up rephrasing it as like, what is like your superpower? And I thought about this and I didn't have a great answer. And I ended up kind of telling him, I was like, honestly, the only thing only thing I think I'm like really good at, maybe better than most, is that I think I just care more than anyone else does. Like, I literally think I just care more about this working and having a big impact on PSAPs more than anyone else in the world. Like, and honestly, like, it's to the point, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, like, it doesn't even have to be with us. Like, I just view this as the number one thing that you can possibly do for your center to improve the quality of life of your telecommunicators. And when I think about this in terms of like technology as a whole, like technology as a whole has actually made the lives of call takers a lot harder. Like, if we went back to 1968, we would be like, wow, taking 911 calls was so easy. You knew exactly where they were coming from. You knew the exact location. And like now, obviously, in many ways, it's gotten progressively harder. And we have this unique opportunity to actually help them reclaim some of their time. Going back to your question, I think that's probably the thing that I think I'm good at. And I don't think it's something that is like a natural talent. I think it's almost like a curse. People always ask me why I'm responding in the middle of the night. Um, but like and then people ask me why we haven't sold the company as everyone else has sold. Um, I just don't imagine that there's anything else I could possibly do in my life that would ever give me as much like happiness and fulfillment as like working day and day with telecommunicators.
Yes. And I love where you're going with that. I know that, being a CEO and starting a business and moving it forward, there has to be a myopic focus on outcomes and where you're steering the company. And when those outcomes involve lives and you're focusing, you have a passion for that, you can move mountains. The sky's the limit. And so, just thank you for sharing that. I have a question. What was the moment where you realized the real problem Aurelion needed to solve wasn't just building the technology, but what was happening after the deployment?
Yeah. So I remember when we were first building this out, it's funny. In retrospect, it's so obvious that like non-emergency calls were going to be, automating non-emergency calls was going to be one of the hottest things in public safety in the next few years. In November of 2023, this was not obvious at all to us. And I remember like really where it kind of boiled down to was our first customer was Mac 911. It was kind of middle of nowhere, rural central Washington, with the director DT Donaldson and Garrett Klein, who's the technical services manager. And one of the things that I actually learned this from hair salons, was that you just have to show up in person. Like calling and emailing, like no one cares. Like sometimes you just have to
Right.
show up in person. And I'd emailed and they basically were like, hey, like, look, like this isn't something we're interested in. We're going to do something else. But like, it was nice meeting you. I wish we had talked earlier. And I, told them a little bit of a white lie. And I said, hey, actually, like, I'm going to be in town. Can I stop in and we can talk about this a little bit? And so I
Yeah.
drove 3.5 hours from Seattle to Grant County, Washington. And we started talking. And I started like kind of showing the platform we had built for hair salons and how I had kind of seen agencies handle non-emergency calls, and I could just see like the light bulb go off in both of their eyes. And um, really, what it was, was there was this idea for them. It was like almost like freedom. It was like, hey, like maybe like for them, it's like 60-70% of their calls are non-emergency calls. Like we're dealing with a staffing crisis. And the way DT describes it now is he's like, if your house is on fire, you don't go and grab, your garden hose, you call the fire department. Like basically, you need to think creatively about this. You can't just
Right.
do what everyone else is doing. And so we ended up going and we ended up basically setting this up for them. And as we were setting it up, there was a few things that became really clear. One, the number of non-emergency calls that come into a center were probably about 20 times. Sorry, the variety of non-emergency calls was probably about 20 times larger than I imagined. And so we built this platform that I thought Garrett would be able to navigate and build. And what I ended up realizing was one, we couldn't sit in a room and imagine all the reasons people call the non-emergency line.
Right.
And the second was that like actually making this work required a fair amount of technical like skill. And Garrett's incredibly smart, but I realized that like it was technical still specific to using our platform. And it made us kind of question this service model. It made us question like this traditional, SaaS service model where you pay a subscription, we give you the platform, we maybe help you set it up. And then after that, you're off on the races. And if you need any help, if you need some support, we'll answer your support tickets in a few business days. It made us question that. And it made us start thinking about like, how can we tie ourselves and our product most directly to the outcome? And what it really came into is like, can we like embed ourselves into the Peace app to make sure that this is driving the outcomes that we wanted to drive and delivering the things that we promised it would? And so that kind of like sparked what I would like say is like, I actually think we'll kind of take public safety by storm. We think about this in the long run, but this like fully managed services approach of like, we are going to be your internal tech support on it. Like, obviously, we're going to need your expertise. We're going to need some of your subject matter experts, but we're going to be the ones in the weeds making the configuration changes and making sure that the software that you just spent a lot of money on is actually going to work. And so it's kind of like we almost stumbled into it. And I think like now it's like, I think in general we've been very lucky, and like this is definitely something that we were kind of lucky on. And what's been really nice and been really valuable about it, and I think this is, maybe like the shifting moment, is that different than traditional software, what we're doing in many ways is like, it's kind of like you have a new trainee.
Right.
And when you have non-emergency calls, like a lot of our customers, they have like 300, agency your size, 300, maybe even 400 different reasons people are calling.
Right.
And to basically put that workload on, for you, you've obviously have a very well built out IT team. You probably have one of the best IT teams in the country, maybe the best. You obviously have a great CAD system admin, but like it's still a lot of work.
Yes.
So it's like, who are you going to kind of put that work on? And we realized we had to kind of internalize that work for you. And like, going back to the kind of the trainee analogy with this, with non-emergency call automation in particular, and I imagine what you see with QA as well, is that it's a living being. The reasons people call you will change. The way that you handle those calls will change. And so by using this kind of embedded approach, it helps us make sure that we're making those configuration changes in the right order, in the right time, and driving the right outcomes for you.
Yep. There's two things that you said that I think is phenomenal. I want to double back on. The first is kind of your entryway into the dispatch center. I'm seeing that theme with the newer CEOs that are entering the space right now, and we're very excited about that. I can tell you, I talked to the other 911 directors, and there are some CEOs that have been kind of in the industry for a long time now that aren't stepping into the dispatch center. So there's a disparate view of what's actually happening in the dispatch center today. But those that are coming in now are having a real world understanding of what those issues and challenges are. And I'll give you an example, kind of segue into point two, where it's not just the non-emergency calls, but it's the vastness of the type of non-emergency calls that we're having to deal with as well. And so I've done some research on your system, and I'll tell you, one of the issues that I've seen is, from a policy perspective, the way you do things in the daytime for non-emergency calls versus what happens at night changes. And so there's just some intricacies there that you made me think about when you were talking through the different variances of those call types.
Oh yeah, the intricacy. I think maybe this is a controversial take. I think taking away dealing with the caller, which I think is probably the hardest part of 911 calls. I think understanding what to do with a non-emergency call is often a lot harder than it is to do with a 911 call. And the reason is that there's a few different reasons. One, we talked about the variety. Most of our customers on the 911 side have like between 100 and maybe 150 different call types on the 911 side. When you go on the non-emergency side and you start looking at like the reasons people are calling you, it's often like hundreds. I mean, I think about this, like even for you, like a simple records request. Like you could have a records request that goes to the county sheriff. You could have someone who's just calling in because they actually need to get to Salt Lake City who you don't even dispatch for. And you have to be able to kind of make those distinctions on the call so that you can help them get the right out. Now, the second piece of that, and you kind of hinted on this, that can make it even harder. SOPs are never that great for non-emergency. Even the best centers, the non-emergency SOPs are underbuilt at best. It's just hard to, and obviously it shouldn't be your number one priority. And then the second is that, or maybe the third rather, is that there's a lot of different reasons, a lot of different ways of handling these calls. So you'll have one call taker who, if someone's trying to get a records request, tells them you need to Google what agency you filed it with, and you need to Google, Salt Lake City Records Department. And then you have the other one that actually just forwards them to the right place. And then you have the other one that just tells them, this is VAC. We don't actually deal with any of that. You need to call the right place, and hangs up on it. And so you kind of have to define like the reasons people are calling, and then also how you want to define the best practice of handling them.
Right. Absolutely. And so why is the post-live phase often underestimated? And why is it actually the most critical stage of vendor-customer relationships?
Yeah, I always think like one thing that always surprised me coming into the space, and this is like part of me just like not knowing much about things generally, but I was really surprised that there was like full-time CAD admins. Like for an agency your size, like almost everyone has a full-time CAD admin. And I'm like, I can't believe this. You spend millions of dollars on this software, and then you have to hire a full-time person just to manage it. And it started making me think about a few things. And one of the biggest ones for us in particular, I think, is that going live is really just the beginning. Like, we actually we tend to try to go live early, and the reason is that, like I said before, me and you can't sit down and write down all the non-emergency reasons people call back. We would never be able to. The way I frame it is everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. You kind of just want to build a very safe way of being able to be punched in the face and learn and iterate and make changes and then improve the scope. I like to think of it very much as a phased go live. Now, obviously, it's really hard to have a phased go live with CAD or your CPE. It's pretty much impossible. But in this software, it's actually really easy to have that phased go live. And so what we're often seeing is that we'll have agencies that go live, 6 weeks in, and we'll be automating 60% of their non-emergency calls. And then it's a great building base for us to be able to go from that 60% to that 75 or that 80% by kind of whack-a-moling all of these random reasons people are calling that we never could have thought about before.
So, can you break down the primary support models vendors typically offer and explain their strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, so I think there's a few buckets of this. So the first one is, you buy, you think about this in the on-prem case. You buy the software on-prem, you pay an implementation fee, it gets set up, and you're off on your own. Maybe you're left with the manual. Maybe there's additional support that you can pay a premium to buy. And that's kind of the old school model, very much the old school model. Now, there's kind of this middle phase, and this didn't really hit public safety too much, but you buy a subscription service, SaaS, and you're left with a software that's significantly more self-serve. I think about this if you're buying something like Frontline for SOP management. It's pretty self-serve, it's pretty intuitive. Maybe you have somebody who takes a short class, and then they actually build it out for your agency. And then, maybe if something is a bug, you have support, but really that's kind of all you have. Then, and that's kind of those two categories, and you can kind of subdivide them and cut them in many ways. That ends up being the majority of support models within public safety. Now, this third one that's really exciting for me is what we do, right? So you have this full SaaS solution that's fully managed. So not only are we going to implement it, we include that in the price, we're also going to actually go out and be the ones making those changes, being your system admin, being the ones in the weeds with your system every single day. And I talked about this a second earlier, but a piece of this that I think is really important is that when these systems get more and more complicated, and I think bringing in AI in the house sometimes makes them more and more complicated, the time to train somebody in how to actually effectively manage the system goes up significantly. For us, it takes us 2 to 3 months to get an implementation person fully ramped. And that's them working full time. I find it really hard to believe that any PSAP has somebody that they can spend 2 or 3 months getting fully ramped and building this out and trying to deliver the value. So kind of those three things, and those are kind of the three general buckets. Part of why I think the last bucket's the best by far is that it also just purely aligns the incentives of the PSAP and the vendor. Because if we were thinking about that second bucket where I gave you software and you're the one managing it, I sold you software rather, and you're the one managing it. If something is not handled correctly in the software, my gut reaction is going to be, Ivan, you set it up wrong. What are you doing? You set it up wrong. This is on you. You need to fix this. But with this, you have one throat to choke. If something goes wrong, you don't have to care if it's a technical issue or a configuration issue. It doesn't matter at all. You just know you want it fixed. And then you send it to our team and we fix it for you. And then it also kind of helps, we kind of internalize a lot of that cost, which helps you kind of figure out the ROI a lot easier. Because you are paying this amount for this software and you're getting this value from it. Rather than you're paying this amount for the software, but then you have to have 1.5 full-time people that are managing it.
Right. Yep. I love where you're going on the adoption piece with that in the post-live environment, and I'll tell you why. I had an opportunity to work with just some phenomenal project managers and customer success folks, and we learned, quickly in working together when I was in the private sector, that the 911 center, they really don't know what they don't know until often after the go live. And so as the functionality starts to take place and they start to see some of the issues and challenges, your model actually has someone there that's tweaking and adjusting and updating in real time. And that's important. So it's good to see the space is actually entering and going in that direction. I've seen a lot of companies not be able to achieve adoption because they don't have a similar model in place. It launches and then they walk away. So
Yeah, no, and I love that point, by the way. with anything like this, like, a bit different than CAD, it makes one, it's like hard to evaluate because you've never had it before. Like, how do you know what's right for you, let alone how do you know how to set it up so it's right for you? And it's
Exactly.
funny, like, we have conversations with directors all the time. I like to kind of just like, the way I describe our service model, and I didn't invent this, by the way, I don't take too much credit, is we like to kind of like think of ourselves as like the high end French waiter. Not like snobbiness aside, but like we're the type of people that like we're not going to let you order the fish if we know that the fish was delivered a week and a half ago and you're not going to have a good time with the fish. Like we're going to make sure we're going to drive you to getting, the fillet, and you're going to get the good bottle of wine, whatever you want, because we know that that's what's actually going to like make you happier. And a lot of what that comes from is just like reps. Like at this point, we've done every piece app, every size, every sort of like configuration you could possibly imagine. And obviously there's nuance between them. But it helps us have like directional sense of like what is likely best for you and help direct you in the right direction.
Excellent stuff. And so, from your perspective, what distinguishes vendors that simply support from those that truly partner for long-term success?
I think there's a few things. So one of the things we were talking about before we turned this on was you were like, I love out clauses. I think like one of the ways that like vendors do a really bad job of tying their incentives to that of the customer is by having these long, massive contracts with no ability of getting out. There's some companies, some very famous companies that love doing 10-year contracts. 10-year contracts with no outs. And to me, that does a few things. So one, it like completely misaligns the incentives. It is like, if I am that vendor, and we see this particularly, you think about this from like the period of like 2012 to 2020 with CADs, where there was a ton of acquisitions within CAD. And then, what happens with a lot of these companies as they mature and, they get acquired is they start thinking about profit maximization. And you have these long-term contracts. And what that means is you lay off the success, you lay off the implementation team, because that's how you can save the most amount of money. It's non-revenue generating activities. And to me, that's really scary. And so when I think about this like alignment, one of the things for us is like we mostly do 3-year contracts now, 3 to 5-year contracts, but we always have like a 1 year out where it's like, hey, if we didn't do the things we say we were going to do, please cancel. We'll give you a prorated refund. And no one's ever taken us up on it. But I think it's good there because then it like forces us to make sure that everyone is on the same page.
And, when I was making a statement about the out, really partnering with us, we're going to achieve adoption if we have the appropriate support. And, one of the things, the relationship with the partner vendor, but there's also the emergency dispatchers on the floor
Yep.
that we have to be very concerned about, because if there's any failed implementations, and then from a cultural and morale perspective, that takes a heavy hit, especially when you pushed an implementation and it doesn't go well.
Oh, you're 100% spot on. I think that's probably, I think about this implementation and this partnership, you hit on a point that I think is probably the most important aspect, which is change management. It's how do
Yes.
you get buy-in from your staff? And, kind of going through high level of my framework, the first piece, and I think I've seen you do this incredibly well, is conveying early and frequently of what you are doing and why you were thinking about doing it well before you've made a decision and well before you've kicked off the project. Seeding it, right? That's one thing that we've seen people time and time again do exceptionally well. And I think that's probably the most disproportionate impact. The second piece is, I think this is where vendors can be like phenomenal partners in helping them. We talked about this on the implementation side. Like we've done a lot of these. And so we've actually seen how a lot of these work, and we've seen how people react. And we can answer a lot of questions better than, questions you might have never even thought of. And so like, I actually think our platform is pretty easy to learn. And, we still go out for every single implementation and do on-site training. And the reason isn't to teach people how to use it. It's actually like really easy to use, right? The reason is that we want to be there to answer their questions and sit side by side with them while they're taking the first test calls and seeing exactly how it's happening so that they know two things. One, they have confidence in exactly how this is going to work. And then the second is that they know that we're actually going to be a partner and be able to make changes and work with them through this. And it's something that's going to kind of change over time. Like I said, it's almost like a living organism. And I think those pieces are really important on the adoption front, and are like easy to skip over. One, because they're kind of costly for the vendor. It's easy just to be like, you're going to have this 30-minute Zoom demo and, we're going to be golden, I promise. But I do think that when I think about like things that had disproportionate impact on our early success, that was number
Right.
one.
Yep. And one of the recommendations that I have for anyone out there that's implementing technology in the 911 center is continue to partner with those that are able to make those quick shifts to where they're able to give you data and say, this is what's happening and this is what we need to do. Those recommendations are critical. I've spoken to some directors to where they said, hey, we don't have the information because we partner with a vendor where the data is not there from how to achieve adoption.
Yeah, I think I saw something about that today. Yeah, where it's like, and I think a lot of the reason why people don't like surfacing these adoption metrics is because they often look really bad. And I think that vendors kind of internalize that. They internalize the idea of, hey, if your staff's not using it, then they're not getting value out of it. And that's like our fault. And oftentimes, honestly, it is. And so they like kind of hiding that data, sometimes even paywalling it. You have to buy the analytics package to be able to see that, whatever it may be, purely for that reason. One thing, Ivan, that we talked about a little bit, I want to kind of pull back, is we talked about this concept of just change within the center. And one of the things that I want to talk about, and I think is often like sometimes lost, is that change is just incredibly stressful for call takers and it's justifiable. Like, yeah, I think about this in a few ways. Like when you're making changes to your center, you're doing it for really the good of a few people. One, the long-term good of the call taker often, and two, the good of the caller. Like you're trying to optimize the outcome in some way or another. Like that is the long-term goal. Telecommunicators, I mean, they're focused on the process. They're focused on doing the things that they were taught to do in the right way. And oftentimes they're obsessive on that and they're phenomenal at it. And when we start changing that process, they're afraid that they now have to change this muscle memory. It's like, I think about this, like I play tennis. So it'd be like changing your serve right before a big game. Like you
Right.
wouldn't do that. No one would ever do that. And so when we think about doing this, we need to do it in a way that is very cognizant of those feelings in that relationship. And they're kind of like need to be perfect because these are emergencies. Well, obviously not in the non-emergency side always, but they are a lot of emergencies.
Right. So, how can organizations hold vendors accountable while still maintaining a collaborative relationship?
Yeah, I think about this, and I tend to think of these questions like with examples. The best person I've ever dealt with this was Jeff Troyer from Kalamazoo, Michigan. He was our maybe maybe fifth customer, something along that lines. And when you're the first few customers of any vendor, like you're taking a risk, right? And the thing that I loved about Jeff, and I love about Jeff now, is just he's a straight shooter on every little thing. And if he thinks something could have been better, he's going to let you know. I think about this internally with our team. One of the most important things to having a productive relationship with anyone is having candid, honest, consistent feedback. And I actually I encourage directors like, hey, to make us the best we're going to be, it's not telling us we're the greatest ever. And, we candies coming out of your ears, whatever it may be. The truth is to tell it how you see it. And when you do that, not only does it help us kind of like align ourselves with what you need and what you need to get out of this, but also helps us make better for the next person. And Jeff is just unbelievably phenomenal at this. He was APCO Director of the Year, so maybe hopefully he doesn't see this. His ego is gonna be too big. But the thing that he did exceptionally well and is he expects that if you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. And like that's actually like the simplest thing that people can do to help hold their vendors accountable.
So, what practical steps should vendors take in the first 90 days post go live to ensure adoption, performance, and customer confidence?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of directions we can go here. A few things that I think of kind of top of mind is like when you think about, kickoff, when you think about starting off a project, the number one thing is you need to set expectations. You need to make sure that everyone knows exactly how this is going to work, exactly what it's going to entail, and exactly what you're expecting to get out of it. And then the most important part is you need to deliver on those expectations. And if you're not going to deliver on it, you need to make it crystal clear that everyone knows why you're not going to do it. And, it could be, when we're thinking about this, like, we're often relying on third-party vendors. When we're getting call audio, like you might have AT&T or Comcast or Spectrum, and they might be forwarding your non-emergency number to us. And it's easy for that to take a little bit longer than expected. But it's really important that when you're thinking about this relationship with the vendor, that there's that direct line of communication when anything unexpected possibly comes up. For us, like we always shoot for aggressive implementation timelines. Most of our implementations are done in 6 weeks, which and my line for this is always like, look, we don't get every implementation done in 6 weeks. We get most of them done in 6 weeks. But the thing is, if we miss, it's going to be 8 weeks. or 9 weeks. It's not going to be 6 months. And so I kind of like getting the buy-in, getting the sign-off from everyone early on so that we have a clear idea of what we're actually trying to do here and what we're actually going to try to drive. Now, the second piece I want to talk about that I think is really important. My girlfriend's a physician. She's an ENT, and she works 28-hour shifts pretty often. Whenever she works a 28-hour shift and I tell somebody that, they always tell me, they're like, Max, that has to be dangerous. People have to die. How can you possibly care for a patient when you're working 28-hour shifts? And what's funny is that like the 28-hour shifts is actually the safest way of doing it. The reason is that when you have critical patients, every time you go from one doctor to the next doctor, you're often losing information. That information can be life or death. When I think about this with implementation, the handoff that I'm thinking of is between the implementation person who gets you live, gets everything steady state, gets you happy, and with the customer success and the support team that's going to kind of continue that care beyond. And so in our case, the way that I think about this is like, how can we minimize that handoff friction? The number one way I think about it is by just having overlapping care. The most painful experience, I think about this when, I'm calling a place. You call a place and, I was thinking of Comcast, I was dealing with our internet bill the other day. And I was talking to our rep and he's like, well, you need to call, the cares division. I was like, okay. And he forwarded me to the cares division. And then I went through a series of 15 questions that I had just answered. And that was an unbelievably infuriating experience. And at some point I was like, I'm just going to get like Starlink or something for our office. Just like, get me out of here. And for us, bringing it back to the public safety world, what I'm thinking about there is like, I want to make sure that when we actually pass what we call a steady state account from implementation to success, that success person knows every little thing about your environment and the way that you operate as that implementation person did. Because the most infuriating thing is if 3 months down the line, you're answering questions that you answered at kickoff, you're not going to have a good time. And so that's a little bit of how I think about those two pieces.
Yeah. Yes, a customer should never know or have to know the setup of your business to get support. It's something that I've been working on technical services and other areas for a while now with companies and providing advice on how to set things up so that the customer just, again, can get the help and support they need by actually stating their issue or challenge. Right.
100%. I actually think this is like a lot of like the mission with Aurelion, right? It's on the non-emergency line. Like the non-emergency line for most municipalities is the de facto 311. It is the dumping ground for anything that anyone doesn't know where to call. They call the non-emergency line. And in many ways, like I think about our system as being that, almost like nervous system of the municipality, of the city, of being able to kind of connect people to the right place, to provide them that information. Because the worst case scenario is you get passed from one place to another and nobody knows who to help you or whose problem this is. And I think it's like an exciting thing that we can actually solve.
Absolutely. When implementing, how do you know you have achieved success, and more so from the perspective of the emergency dispatcher? I'll go a little bit further. They hear the phones ringing, but in your situation, they don't hear the incoming call anymore. So how do they think of success when you're implementing?
Yeah, we hit on is one of the weirdest things about our product. And I remember the very first go live, talking about Mac 911 again. I remember turning it on and, you have this loud, bustling peace app and it just goes silent. It's like the absence of anything, the sound of silence. And with systems like this, like what actually makes it really nice is that you can just measure it. Like it's actually really easy to figure out how many calls are we taking now versus how many calls are we taking before implementation. And so when we think about success, there's a few pieces of this that I think are really important. And so the first one is like actually like defining what success is before you buy the software. And so I remember one of the things that we used to do as our first step of implementation is we would take a few thousand of your call recordings and we would run it through our system. And we'd be able to tell you, these are the reasons people are calling you. This is what impact we could possibly have. And I remember showing it to a director and he said to me, he was like, Max, I can't believe you didn't show this to me 3 months ago when I was trying to sell this to my board. Because what we told him was exactly the impact that we thought we'd be able to have and exactly how we thought we were going to be able to have that impact. And so one of the things that we've been doing that I think has definitely changed the trajectory of the business was we do these health assessments before we sign any contract, oftentimes before we even give a quote, that gives us a sense of what is that impact we could have. Because every center is different. VEC is structurally very similar to Snohomish County 911, one of our customers. You serve almost the exact same number of people. You take almost the exact same number of calls. If we looked at you guys, you're probably 95% similar. The problem is, and I think it's easy to generalize, PSAPs. The problem is, for you all, that 5% isn't a nice to have. That 5% is often life or death. And so it's actually really important that we can understand what impact we're going to have for you and how we're going to have that impact, and make sure that that impact is tailored to the needs of your PSAP and your community.
Yep. So funny that you say that. We've created a projection, and I show it to everyone, our board of trustees, our chiefs, our emergency dispatchers. You're going to laugh at this, but year one, success to us is 10% adoption, which is 60,000 calls. So for us, 12,500 calls is one FTE. Not concerned with the FTE count, but just those measurements to be able to articulate it. And then we're looking year 4 to be around 50% adoption. I really appreciate what you're saying about setting those goals beforehand. And I encourage 911 directors to go ahead and do that if they're going to implement not just non-emergency AI, but any tool in the dispatch center.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love that take.
So what's something you've seen happen after go live, either with Aurelion or others, that made you think this is where companies actually win or lose?
Remember, one of my favorite go lives, very timely because I just mentioned Snohomish County 911. I think it was November 18th, 2024. And I'm there on site in the center, and we're getting ready to turn on, and 2 things happen. One, their CAD goes out, unrelated to us, I will say. We were not involved, but the CAD goes down. And then, that kind of resolves 2 hours later, and then we finally go live. And then we are hit with a bomb cyclone. I had never heard of a bomb cyclone, to be honest. When you think of, it's essentially, for those in the East, it's a nor'easter out west. And so very quickly, 250,000 people lost power out of 800,000 people in this community. And the calls just started flooding in. And this is our first day of go live. And I remember thinking, I was like, what did I do to deserve this? And I was like, all right. I remember talking to the director, and I said, Kurt, it's been great. We're going to delay the go live. We'll kick it off when the storm, dies over. And he's like, are you out of your mind? Like, this is why this software exists. This is why we're doing what we're doing. And I sat down with Derek Wilson, who is their operations manager. And in about a 3-minute span, we actually changed the system a little bit. And what we did was that we basically made it so that anyone who was calling about power outages, as we were getting literally hundreds of them every 10 minutes, we directed them to the utilities district. But before we did that, and this is what we changed, so we actually asked them, hey, do you need your power on for any medical reason? And I can't remember the exact numbers. I'm going to say it was in about a 1.5 or 2 hour span, we took 450 calls. And those calls, oftentimes, they would have just gone on hold. There was the 911 calls for ringing off the hook, let alone the non-emergency. And what we're able to do is, there was one call out of those 450 where it was a woman who was calling because her husband was stuck under the chairlift halfway up the stairs. And so that one call got a response. And I think it kind of framed me, talk about why companies win. It framed me on 2 things. I think 2 things that are going to be more important than ever. And I think that the thing I love about public safety is that everyone talks about them more than ever. But the number one is just going to be responsiveness. I think about this as maybe this will make me sound tyrannical. For a long time, we've now changed just a little bit. We had no company holidays. And the reason was that if the PSAPs are working, we should be working. And you have PTO, you take your PTO, but if the PSAPs are working, we should be working. And I think that part of that cultural message was also kind of tied with we have 24/7 support for everything. I view this, even though it's a non-emergency line, it's mission critical. And being able to kind of spin things up, make changes on the fly is by and large probably the most satisfying thing we can ever do. I don't know if you saw the social media blow up. Ridgeland Farms, it's in Dane County, Wisconsin.
Yes.
I feel like you might even know the story better than I do, but there was a beagle testing facility, and these activists ended up storming it and then getting arrested. And then the entire world was calling Dane County 911 and literally harassing their call takers. And we were about to start implementation. I think we were just about to start, and we were able to fast track their implementation to like literally like a 4-hour period just to start taking these calls from protesters. And I think in the first day, we took like 1,200 calls that we stopped getting in from the center by setting that up. And like, I think like, you talk about like, well, I don't know if that's going to make people win or lose. And, I don't know if like that actually has that much impact. But I know that the impact that it has for me and my company is that we've gathered probably, I would say, some of the most caring people about this industry that we could possibly imagine. And we've aligned them perfectly on this mission of two things. How can we reduce non-emergency call volume? And how can we help call takers on 911 calls with life guidance? And I think that, like, I think really where that compounds is it helps us do the things. This is a very long, the company will be around for a very long time, hopefully. It helps us do the things that compound and have the most impact because I want to be working with our customers till like the day I die.
Right.
But those are two kind of fun little stories.
And those are phenomenal stories. And I can tell you, throughout this entire discussion, I picked up so many nuggets and just listening to you. One of the bigger takeaways is, what you're doing is leaving those emergency dispatchers available to take those high priority calls, answer them quicker, quicker response. We know that second saves lives. So, the staffing is one thing, but what you're doing from an outcomes perspective and saving lives. So thanks for what you're doing in the industry. As we come to a close in the discussion, is there anything that you would like our listeners to know about Aurelion, your journey, or what's next in the future?
Yeah, and we have an announcement coming soon, so maybe I don't want to spoil anything else. But in
Yep.
general, like when I think, but people ask me a lot about two things. One, in the particular market, they've asked me, when are we going to sell? It's the number one question I get. And then the second is like, what's next for us? And on the maybe I'll answer kind of both those questions, two birds with one stone. On the second part, like really for us, what we're fully focused on doing is like how can we help PSAPs best serve their communities? It's like the number one mission. That's the North Star. And whether it be like reducing non-emergency call volumes so they can focus on 911 calls, whether it be assisting them on actual 911 calls to make sure that they're collecting the right information, because all we know, as you know more than others, the expectations on call takers are unbelievable. And that's kind of expanding now to a lot of other subsets of the role in very exciting ways. And what like I would say about the first part is that is like our sole focus. And like we are solely focused on doing that. And I think like what this industry lacks right now is that to get there is like a lot of hard things, to do a lot of like really impactful things. And smaller companies like GovWorks, like us, have this ability to kind of scale and meet the customer needs where they are because we're not beholden to shareholders. We're beholden to the customer. And that's really like an exciting opportunity. And, I'm excited to kind of see where it goes and continue on this path.
Absolutely. Max Keenan, thanks for joining the podcast. Thanks for being an innovator, pioneer, and we appreciate you joining in.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you having me.